All right. Hopefully, so far you have had some reasonable grasp about how the exception handling will work, especially whenever the caller is facing the catch with specified requirements, which one you should really opt for is going to have different consequence. That's really the important point I want to carry forward to you. For completeness, let's now finish the third version over here, where none of the callers will actually catch the exception, meaning that the exception will be thrown directly to the console, right? I want to show that to you as well. Let's now go over the high-level idea visually, and then I'll show you very quickly on the debugger in Eclipse as before. So for version number 3, what's going to happen is, let's just remind ourselves quickly, okay? So this is where the exception is originated, okay, for the error, okay? So this is where the exception is originated. And as I said before, typically in the same method where the exception is originated, you don't really try to catch it in the same place. That's not the way to go. Otherwise, why don't you simply put whatever that's in the catch block outside the try and catch block and get rid of the catch block, try and catch block. That's what I illustrated to you before. Anyway, so that's why we chose to specify it. Okay, so let me highlight it to you. You can see throws negative value exception, and for its caller it also throws negative value exception, and also here even for the main method we also say throws negative value exception. You can see for all the caller along the stack of the call of the method call, we simply just specify the same exception, meaning that you can think about nobody is willing to take responsibility for handling the exception, right? But that's okay. That's it's definitely allowed in Java. Let's now remind ourselves very quickly. You can see this is the method call that might actually throw the exception, right? You can think about this kind of corresponds to a.ma. So this correspond to exactly this throws. That's how we can infer that from the header. And also ob.mb over here, we know that you can also throw the exception according to the header of b.mb over here, right? So that's why you also need to either catch it or specifies it. In that case, you also choose to specifies it, okay, over here. Okay, so that's about the crucial difference compared with the earlier two versions. Let's now take a look at the call stack very quickly. So again, there's a call stack that we have for the three methods. So tester.main calls b.mb, which calls a.ma. That's why we got this call stack. This is where the exception is originated, which will be propagated because it specifies it. It will be propagated to b.mb, which also specifies it, so it will be propagated further to test.main, which also specifies it, so that will be propagated to the furthest possible, which is the console. All right, so that's about a visual summary about version number 3. Let's now verify what's going to happen in the debugger. Okay, let me now switch to Eclipse. Let me clear what I had in the earlier session. Let me simply clear over here. And let me close. And also switch back to the Java perspective. Okay. And let's now take a look at version number 3 over here. Again, you can see version A. This is where we say throw new negative value exception. Class B. So this is where we specifies it. Of course, in class A, we also specifies it as well. And also in the tester domain, we also specify it. But I can tell you that it's very rare you will actually see, besides the main method, which is the main entry point of execution, which will eventually become the bottom of the stack, you will actually say throws the exception to specify it. This should be the latest point in practice for you to handle any exception that might occur. But in this case, I just want to illustrate to you what might happen. Okay, it's just possible. All right, so let's now put the breakpoint over here. Okay, put in line number 19. And then right before we call this method, which will eventually trigger the negative value exception. And let's now launch the debugger. So right click on the tester under version 3, and then debug as Java application. Okay, so before we launch the before we get switched to the debug perspective, we are only over here right after the prompt, so we haven't reached the breakpoint just yet. Okay, so I'm gonna enter -10, after I hit enter, we will reach the breakpoint over here, line number 19. And I will switch to debug perspective over here. All right. And then now let me now show you the first run. If I simply say step over here, what's going to happen is this will eventually trigger that negative value exception over here. But as we know, it's going to be propagated to here, and propagated to all the way to the console. That's what's going to happen, right? Because no caller is willing to catch it, which is legitimate because they all choose to specify it. If I say step over, you will see that we actually got negative value exception thrown over here, right? It just simply show you that it's being thrown. And then if I say step over, and let's analyze the exception that's being thrown to the console line by line quickly, right? Especially these three lines correspond to the call stack, right? You can see test.main, b.mb, a.ma. So remember the call stack we had over here. Tester.main, b.mb, a.ma, right? Exactly the call stack. And then more useful information is about the link to the corresponding line. If you click on, let's say here, let's go from the top to the bottom. So the top stack, this is where the original exception was. This is where the exception was originated. So if you click on that, it's going to be line number 11 of class A. So this is where we throw the exception. If you click on the second one on the stack, that will be line number 12 of b.mb. So this is where the exception was thrown from the callee, but we chose to specify it, right? And then if you click on the bottom of the stack, so this is where the exception was eventually thrown to this context over here, this caller, but this caller also chose to specify the exception. That's why it will be thrown directly to the console, like what you saw over here. All right. Let me now do one more run for the debugger by stepping into, just to show you a little bit more. Okay. If I click on the debugger once more, and let me enter -10, and then I'm now here, right? Let me now step into the call of b.mb. Okay. If I step into, I'm now over here. So now under b.mb, and then I'm going to create a, and then I'll make a call. The callee will be a.ma, of course. If I say step into again, so now I'm in this original, this method where the exception is originated, right? And the input value that has been passed is -10, so that's negative. So it's going to pass the error condition. So now we will throw new negative value exception. So we are now here. So we have triggered this method called chain over here, and then we are now here. And we say throw new negative value exception. So now it will be propagated to here, and then to here. You can see both callers over here will both choose to not to catch it, but to specify it. So let's see what's going to happen if I say step over. All the intermediate propagation points will not be shown. So we'll see directly to the console where the exception is thrown. If I say step over, you can see that's the one, right? That's the message we just saw over here. You don't see any intermediate propagation, but it will just directly be propagated to the console. So that's about version number 3. In some way, version number 3 is pretty easy because no caller in the call chain over here, namely this caller here, none of them will take responsibility. Well, that even though it's easy to understand, but it's actually very bad practice. You should at least try to handle the exception at the latest point over here in the main method. But typically, it should be actually along the way that you actually handle the exception. So just remember the principle is either catch or specify. If no caller will actually choose to catch the exception, it will be eventually thrown to the console if we talk about some console application. All right, so please review all the 3 versions that we have spoken about, and also review the catch or specify requirements, and also review the principle of handling exception on the call stack. And then we'll move on to the next video to revisit the circle and the bank example that we spoke about before.